Millionaire took his mistress on vacation while his pregnant wife was on Bedrest. In a world of gleaming penthouses, whispered scandals, and diamonds that sparkle under relentless city lights, sometimes the worst betrayals happen in the quietest corners of a gilded home. Our story follows a man who had everything: money, prestige, and a radiant wife carrying his unborn child. But behind the marble walls and shimmering chandeliers, he was consumed by secrets that refused to stay in the shadows. When a vacation became more than just an innocent escape and a mistress's presence threatened an entire family's future, fault lines fractured beneath the polished surface. Prepare yourself for a tale that proves, once again, that wealth cannot buy loyalty, nor can fame shield us from heartbreak. Alexander Pierce had grown used to the constant hum of admiration. From the time he was a teenager mowing lawns in the quaint suburb of Rivercrest, he'd heard murmurs of just how special he was. He had the business spark, they said, that rare visionary gleam. By the age of 30, Alexander was already a millionaire, driving a sleek imported car through the same streets where he once pushed his tattered lawnmower. Folks would wave and whisper his name as he passed, heads turning in awe. Over time, Alexander transformed his early landscaping hustle into a commercial real estate empire. He built apartments, office towers, and eventually upscale hotels. As the money rolled in, he found his name cited in local business magazines, right alongside established moguls. He met influential leaders, from corporate executives to community organizers, who all wanted a slice of his intelligence and his wealth. He was unstoppable, or so he believed. In those early days, he fell in love with Clara Hoffman, a bright and compassionate nurse he met during a charity fundraiser for underprivileged children. Her warm smile, genuine concern for others, and quiet strength immediately captivated him. Perhaps it was the contrast: where he was loud, she was gentle; where he chased opulence, she found joy in simplicity. They were married in a flurry of celebration at a scenic vineyard on the outskirts of town, surrounded by high-profile guests, but also by the local families who cherished Clara's kind soul. For Alexander, marriage was a crowning achievement, yet it quickly fell behind his financial conquests in terms of everyday focus. While he adored Clara, he often found himself swallowed up by the frantic pace of his business expansions. She supported him wholeheartedly, never voicing a single complaint about his late nights or missed dinners. After all, she understood his ambitions, and she believed wholeheartedly in his dreams because, in many ways, she was one of them. Whenever he would come home, exhausted but triumphant over closing another major deal, Clara welcomed him with unconditional love, a warm meal and a steadfast devotion. But quiet cracks form even in the most formidable armor. Underneath the glow of success, Alexander's hunger for something more, a sense of danger, an adrenaline rush he couldn't quite name, began to eat away at him. He'd started noticing fleeting attention from certain circles, flattering words, suggestive glances from women at high-end galas, even quiet enticements at business mixers. With every new real estate triumph, his confidence grew, and with it a silent restlessness whispered, "Is this really all there is?" Life changed the moment Clara announced her pregnancy. Alexander, initially taken aback, felt his heart swell with a new kind of excitement. He had always imagined a future with children he pictured strolling with a small boy or girl through the gardens of his freshly built estates, teaching them about hard work and ambition. Clara's eyes sparkled with joy, and Alexander, for a moment, believed this child would anchor them more firmly together. Months passed, and for a while the Pierces found bliss. Alexander would shift board meetings around just to be there for Clara's ultrasound appointments. He'd come home early to see her cradle her slightly swollen belly in front of the mirror, And in those moments, he felt the stirrings of genuine happiness. Clara, who had always been gentle and nurturing, was practically radiant. She imagined a world of bedtime stories, baby blankets, and sweet lullabies. Together, they picked out a soft, pale green color for the nursery walls, carefully selected a crib crafted from sustainable wood, and even started discussing baby names over dinner. But fate, as it often does, had another plan. Just as Clara reached her 6th month of pregnancy, complications arose. She fainted one morning while simply trying to fix breakfast. Rushed to the hospital, she was diagnosed with a condition that demanded constant bed rest to protect both her health and that of the unborn child. Although the specialists assured the couple that everything could still go smoothly if Clara avoided strain or stress, it felt like their perfect world now teetered on the edge. The new situation required changes. Clara's mother, Karen Hoffman, herself a seasoned nurse, moved in to help. She and Clara never expected they would need such intense care, but Karen was determined to ensure her daughter and future grandchild stayed healthy. As Karen settled in, she kept a watchful eye on everything, quietly noticing how Alexander's work schedule barely allowed him any time at home. She told herself that he was busy providing for his family, but a gnawing doubt nibbled at the corners of her thoughts. Could he be there more? Alexander's routine was indeed relentless. Business lunches in high-rise boardrooms, negotiations with foreign investors, brand-building events at art galleries, and the occasional late-night gatherings at upscale clubs. Since Clara could no longer accompany him due to bed rest, he navigated these social waters alone. At times, he caught himself feeling uneasy about the situation. After all, he was a married man whose pregnant wife was confined at home. Still, whenever these pangs of guilt surfaced, he pushed them away. For a man used to conquering challenges, he believed his life was still under control. Enter Ava Beaumont, charismatic, with a sleek bob of dark hair and an air of quiet sophistication. She was the newest public relations consultant Alexander had hired for a special project. She was recommended to him by a mutual acquaintance at an exclusive charity gala, someone who praised her ability to manage both press relations and brand image for powerful figures. Intrigued, Alexander arranged a meeting. At first glance, Ava seemed entirely professional. She arrived at his office impeccably dressed, her briefcase filled with brand analyses and marketing strategies. There was something magnetic about her presence, though, and it only intensified when they talked. She had a keen sense of humor, an easy laugh that made her approachable, and a knack for listening in a way that made a person feel deeply understood. During that first consultation, she outlined how to strengthen Alexander's public persona, ensuring that his philanthropic initiatives like funding local children's hospitals received the attention they deserved. Alexander was impressed. People rarely impressed him anymore, given his years in high-stakes business circles. Yet Ava's style was refreshingly energetic. He decided to hire her on the spot, a move that raised eyebrows among some of his long-time associates. She was still young, but her reputation soared among insiders. She must have some serious talent if so many big names have vouched for her, Alexander thought, ignoring the mild disapproval from older colleagues. Even Karen, while visiting the office to deliver some documents from Clara, noticed the buzz around Ava's name. Their work relationship began innocently enough. Countless business dinners in sophisticated restaurants became the norm. After all, they needed to strategize away from the hustle of the office, away from the prying eyes of the press. Over salted caramel desserts and expensive wine, they spoke about budgets, philanthropic outreaches, upcoming real estate developments, and how to steer the narrative so that Alexander Pierce appeared not just as a real estate mogul, but as a patron of innovation and philanthropy. It's all for the brand, Alexander told himself, yet beneath that veneer of professionalism, a tension simmered. The gentle brush of hands when exchanging paperwork, the lingering glances that lasted a second too long, the playful banter that veered into personal territory, these were all signs of a subtle but growing flame. Ava seemed aware of Alexander's marriage. She even asked how Clara was doing, feigning concern. But her sympathy ended there. Late-night phone calls about urgent brand issues often slid into flirtatious territory. Her compliments became more personal, her voice softer, her laughter more inviting. Alexander rationalized it. I'm just bored, overworked, lonely in my successes, and craving excitement. He convinced himself he could handle a friendly flirtation, that it was a harmless spark in a business partnership. But invisible lines, once crossed, are rarely undone. And the moment Alexander invited Ava onto his private yacht for an informal meeting, it became clear that they were heading down a treacherous path, one where the fortress of his public image could shatter under a single, careless misstep. Back at home, Clara's bed-rest routine became a mundane cycle. She watched the world pass by through the bedroom window. A small glimpse of manicured lawns, the mailman's daily arrival, and the steady hum of neighborhood gossip was all she could grasp from her confined vantage point. Karen did her best to lift her daughter's spirits, chatting about everything from baby gear recommendations to old family memories. Yet, as days stretched into weeks, Clara's initial positivity waned under the weight of her isolation. Her husband's presence was another missing puzzle piece. Alexander made efforts in the beginning, bringing flowers, ordering gourmet takeout so she wouldn't miss out on fine dining, even sending her sweet text messages about how proud he was of her for being so strong. But those gestures tapered off. Soon enough, his calls became shorter and his visits briefer. Clara told herself he was busy. She reasoned that the new developments he was building required more of his time and that business expansions never slowed down. She also trusted him. Trust was something she'd never questioned, at least not until lonely nights and her own vulnerable state forced her to reevaluate. Word of Alexander's dinners with Ava occasionally reached Clara's ears through the carefully filtered gossip pipeline. A friend of Karen's saw them at a chic bistro one evening. The friend mentioned how perfectly matched they looked, discussing business over glasses of red wine. When Karen heard this, she felt a pang of concern. But she tried to reassure Clara that appearances could be deceiving, that Alexander often dined with associates. It's the nature of his work, Karen insisted, yet the seeds of doubt took root. Clara tried to push away suspicion. She reminded herself that her husband was a man of power and influence. Business dinners, especially with someone who managed his public image, were part of the package. The more she told herself this, however, the more she realized how little she truly knew about Alexander's daily life anymore. When did we stop talking about everything? When did I become an afterthought? One day, as she lay in bed reading a parenting magazine, Clara's phone buzzed with a message. It was Alexander saying he would be out of town for a weekend trip to the West Coast to meet a potential investor. Although she tried to be supportive, her heart sank. She typed back a few encouraging words. Good luck. Be safe, but tears welled in her eyes. She couldn't help but wonder if his distant behavior was because something else or someone else had captured his focus. Unbeknownst to Clara, the potential investor meeting was a lie. In truth, Alexander was headed for an intimate weekend in Aspen with Ava. It was all arranged quietly. A private jet departing late on a Friday night, luxurious accommodations in a secluded chalet, days spent skiing, and nights spent in front of a roaring fire. Just a brief escape, Alexander told himself. He would be back on Monday, resuming life as the devoted husband. He wanted excitement, he just never considered the price of stepping outside the bounds of his marriage at such a critical time. Aspen's crisp mountain air greeted Alexander and Ava as they stepped off the private jet late on a Friday night. Swirls of snowflakes danced around them, illuminated by the dim runway lights. An eager chauffeur in a tailored uniform welcomed them with a cordial nod and escorted them to a sleek, black SUV. With tinted windows shielding their identities from prying eyes, they wound through winding forest roads toward the exclusive chalet Alexander had arranged. The chalet itself was tucked into a remote slope, surrounded by towering pines and blanketed by fresh snowfall. Its wooden beams, tall glass panels, and glowing lanterns conveyed both rustic charm and high-end luxury, the perfect retreat for two people seeking anonymity. Inside, the staff awaited them with quiet efficiency. A private chef, a butler, and a few housekeepers, each one trained to handle high-profile guests, without question whisked away luggage, offered warm towels, and poured glasses of aged whiskey by the crackling fire. No one asked about the identity of the beautiful woman with Alexander, nor did they acknowledge that he wore no wedding band. Discretion was part of the chalet's allure, and everyone was well compensated for their silence. From the moment they set foot in the lavish living room, a fierce tension crackled between Alexander and Ava. She draped her arms around his neck, leaning into him with a sly smile as she inhaled the scent of pine drifting in through the open windows. This was their world, if only for the weekend, a hidden paradise where judgments and obligations faded, replaced by the heady thrill of doing what they both knew was forbidden. Alexander felt his pulse quicken at her touch, each kiss fueling his conflicted desire. He told himself he deserved a break from his relentless schedule. His entire life had been about building an empire, perhaps. For once, he was entitled to indulge. They wasted no time settling into the chalet's master suite. Ava admired the sleek interior design, a massive four-poster bed with plush white linens, a private fireplace, and a balcony overlooking panoramic views of twinkling ski slopes below. The second their luggage was set down, they were in each other's arms, lost in a whirlwind of heated kisses and tangled sheets. Hours later, they re-emerged for dinner, both wearing contented smiles. A decadent five-course meal awaited them in the dining room, courtesy of the private chef who skillfully combined local ingredients with gourmet flair. Each bite of creamy risotto and herb-crusted lamb felt like a proclamation of their stolen moments, a feast spiced by the rush of secrecy. The following morning, they rose early to catch the best ski runs. The chalet's butler helped them into tailored ski gear, while the chef packed a thermos of hot cocoa and fresh pastries. Ava, a novice on the slopes, giggled with excitement. She trailed behind Alexander as he led her down gentle trails, offering pointers with a mischievous grin. Their laughter rang through the cold air, two people reveling in fleeting freedom. Occasionally, a fellow skier would glance their way, perhaps recognizing Alexander's famous jawline from local news stories, but the short glimpses never lasted. In a place like Aspen, wealthy visitors were commonplace, and staff or bystanders rarely pried. Yet, despite the picturesque scenery and Ava's vivacious company, Alexander felt pangs of guilt sharpen each time they stopped to rest. Whenever he checked his phone, he was reminded of the real world he had left behind, a world where Clara was confined to Bedrest, quietly enduring a challenging pregnancy on her own. Between runs, he found himself scrolling through old photos of Clara, imagining her gentleness and unyielding loyalty. Even the crisp mountain breeze couldn't blow away the weight of betrayal pressing on his conscience. Over lunch at a chic slope-side bistro, Ava posted carefully selected images to her private social media feed. A shot of her resting on the chalet's balcony, the faintest outline of Alexander's silhouette in the background, a boomerang of her swirling a glass of fine wine. She never tagged him by name. She wasn't that reckless, but she enjoyed dropping subtle hints that hinted at opulence. Her inner circle, curious and hungry for gossip, sent messages brimming with curiosity. A secret romance? A millionaire companion? The speculation fueled AVA's vanity, and she relished every digital comment, and like that flowed her way. That evening, after a long day on the slopes, they returned to the chalet. The staff had prepared a candlelit dinner in front of the roaring fireplace. Truffle risotto, seared scallops, and a decadent chocolate soufflé, every dish heightened the sense of indulgence. But the flavors were layered with Alexander's mounting remorse. He would sneak glances at his phone, scanning for any messages from Clara or updates about her condition. Several times he caught himself about to text her a simple "I love you" or "I miss you," but the words felt hollow in the moment. What right did he have to profess devotion when he was in the arms of another woman? Ava sensed his ambivalence, but dismissed it as a phase he would overcome. In her eyes, their connection had evolved far beyond a mere fling. She envisioned a future where his marriage was little more than a footnote he'd soon erase. Whenever he hesitated, she took it upon herself to remind him of the thrill they shared. A sly smile, a whispered promise of the night's private delights, or a flirtatious joke at the dinner table. Ava was adept at refocusing his attention whenever remorse threatened to steal him away. Still, reality's intrusion arrived on their second night, fracturing the fantasy they had so carefully crafted. While Ava slipped into a silk robe after dinner, Alexander scrolled through his phone to find a text message from Karen, a brief but alarming note stating that Clara had nearly fainted once more and was taken in for urgent tests. The baby remained stable, but doctors insisted that she stay vigilant, minimize all stress, and possibly prepare for an extended hospital stay if her condition worsened. Alexander's heart pounded. He excused himself and stepped out onto the chalet's balcony, letting the frigid wind sting his skin as he dialed Clara's number. She sounded faint, but tried to assure him she was doing okay. Her voice quivered with uncertainty. Overwhelmed by guilt and fear, Alexander lied through his teeth about how work negotiations in the West Coast had extended longer than expected. She believed him, or at least she wanted to believe him. When he hung up, the weight of his betrayal settled like a lead blanket over his shoulders. He stared into the star-freckled sky, wrestling with his conscience. Back inside, Ava found him pale and pensive. "Everything all right?" she asked, reaching for his hand. He hesitated for a beat, then forced a tight smile. "Just business," he replied. Ava studied him, her eyes filled with curiosity. Although she suspected the call had something to do with Clara, she chose not to press. Part of Ava's strategy was never appearing threatened by Alexander's home life. So she changed the subject, diverting him with soft kisses and murmured excitement about the next day's plans. Caught in the crossroads of guilt and desire, Alexander let himself be led back to the comforting warmth of her embrace. Yet even as they sank onto the plush sofa in front of the fire, he couldn't shake the thought that he was stepping further into a labyrinth from which it might be impossible to return. The weekend was meant to be a brief retreat from the complications of his world, a stolen interlude for excitement. Instead, it was fast becoming a critical junction that threatened to destroy everything he held dear. And with every kiss Ava pressed against his lips, Alexander wondered if this forbidden pleasure would be worth the price he would inevitably have to pay. Word began to spread among Alexander's close-knit employees. A personal assistant noticed the dates on his travel itinerary didn't match any official investor meetings. A long-time driver was suspicious when Aspen kept cropping up with no mention of an actual business function. Whispers floated through the corridors of Alexander Pierce Enterprises, and some staff members even exchanged knowing glances whenever Ava's name appeared in conversation. Despite their reservations, few dared approach him directly. Alexander was the boss, a man whose wealth and influence could make or break a career in a heartbeat. One individual, however, found herself increasingly torn about keeping silent. Veronica Slater, Alexander's longtime executive secretary, had witnessed his rise from a daring young entrepreneur to a self-assured mogul. She had watched him fall in love with Clara, sending weekly flower bouquets to the hospital ward where Clara worked, just to brighten her shifts. Over the years, Veronica came to admire not just Alexander's ambition, but also Clara's gentle spirit. She had attended the couple's wedding, seen their joy, heard the earnest vows they exchanged under a summer sun. To see Alexander entangled with Ava shook Veronica deeply. As the rumors escalated, Veronica began to worry about Clara, especially given her delicate pregnancy. She wrestled with the dilemma: should I tell Clara the truth, risking my job, or is it better to keep quiet and hope Alexander sorts out his affairs before it's too late? Loyalty pulled her in different directions: loyalty to Alexander as her employer and loyalty to Clara as a woman deserving honesty. The tension became unbearable after Veronica received a call from Karen, who had rung the office to find out why Alexander hadn't returned home the previous night. Clara had grown even more anxious, and Karen suspected something was amiss. Over the phone, Karen politely asked if Veronica could confirm that Alexander was truly on a work trip. Veronica, torn, fumbled through a vague confirmation, her heart pounding. She hated lying, but she also feared revealing too much. After ending the call, she slumped in her chair, staring at the phone like it was a coiled serpent. Meanwhile, Alexander returned from Aspen on a Monday morning, looking both exhilarated and drained. He breezed through the office, greeting staff with a bright smile that seemed to mask deeper turmoil. Ava arrived shortly thereafter, her own demeanor brimming with private triumph. Veronica watched them from behind her desk, stomach churning. How long before Clara puts the pieces together? That same evening, Alexander finally made it home to find Clara asleep in their bedroom. He kissed her forehead and slipped under the covers, still smelling of winter pine and expensive cologne. She stirred awake briefly, murmuring how glad she was he was back. He felt her hand, tender and trusting, reach for his. Guilt stabbed him. He wondered how much longer he could maintain the facade before it all came crashing down. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the Pierce household became increasingly strained. Karen, noticing Alexander's detachment, grew suspicious. She would catch him scrolling through his phone at odd hours, smiling at messages he refused to discuss. Clara, on the other hand, tried to remain upbeat for the sake of her baby. Yet she sensed a distinct shift. Though Alexander was physically present more often, perhaps out of guilt, he seemed mentally elsewhere. Their conversations were clipped, their once easy banter replaced by forced pleasantries. One afternoon, as Clara dozed in bed, the doorbell rang. Karen answered to find a courier delivering an extravagant bouquet of lilies, red roses, and baby's breath. Nestled in the flowers was a note, addressed to Alexander with a teasing line: "Remember our last getaway? Here's to planning the next one soon." Heart pounding, Karen quickly tucked the card away, thanked the courier, and carried the bouquet to the kitchen. She knew she had stumbled upon something far more tangible than mere rumors. For a moment, she considered confronting Alexander with it, but fear of upsetting her pregnant daughter and risking further stress stayed her hand. That evening, Karen quietly pulled Veronica's number from Clara's phone. She rang the secretary once Clara was asleep, speaking in hushed tones. The conversation was hesitant at first, but Karen's desperation soon unlocked Veronica's conscience. In a shaky voice, Veronica confirmed what Karen had suspected, that Alexander was indeed in a romantic entanglement with Ava Beaumont. She apologized profusely for not speaking up sooner, expressing her loyalty to Clara and her anguish at keeping such a secret. Karen, furious and heartbroken, thanked her for finally telling the truth. She hung up, trembling with outrage and concern. For hours, Karen paced the living room, debating how to reveal this to Clara. The doctor's warnings about stress echoed in her mind. She knew any shock could lead to complications. But the deception was too enormous to conceal. As if on cue, Alexander walked in, noticing the bouquet on the kitchen table. His face paled when he spotted the card. He swiftly took it in hand, only to discover that the envelope had been neatly torn open. He locked eyes with Karen, who glared at him with a mixture of disgust and disappointment. In a calm but ice-cold voice, Karen confronted him. "Who is Ava? And what are you doing with her while my daughter is confined to this bed?" The question hung in the air, a challenge impossible to dodge. Caught off guard, Alexander stood speechless. He glanced over at the hallway leading to Clara's room. For the first time since his fling began, he felt the walls of his deception closing in, threatening to suffocate him. An unspoken dread pulsed in the space between them. If Clara found out, what kind of devastation might follow? Caught red-handed, Alexander struggled to piece together a coherent defense. Karen was unrelenting, her face set in a fury that even Alexander's legendary charm couldn't soften. "You swore to protect and love Clara," she hissed, voice trembling with equal parts anger and heartbreak. "How could you even think of running around with another woman, especially when my daughter's life and your child's life depend on her peace of mind?" Alexander, for once in his life, seemed at a total loss. He apologized in disjointed phrases, insisting he never meant to hurt Clara, that his affair with Ava was a mistake, a moment of weakness spun out of control. Karen stared at him, her eyes flashing. "A mistake is tripping over a curb, Alexander," she snapped. "This is a betrayal, and you don't get to decide how much it will cost you or my daughter." In that moment, Clara's voice called from the bedroom, weak but audible. "Mom? Alexander? Everything okay?" Karen swallowed, her anger momentarily tempered by the instinct to protect her daughter. She turned to Alexander, her voice low and urgent. "You need to tell her. So help me. If you don't, I will." With that, Karen marched down the hall to Clara's room, leaving Alexander to confront his guilt and mounting panic. That night, Alexander tried to muster the courage for a confession, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He told Clara that the bouquet was from a business associate expressing gratitude, and Karen, steeling herself, remained silent. Clara sensed tension, but dismissed it as another side effect of her bedrest predicament. Exhausted, she fell asleep without pressing further. In the days that followed, Karen and Alexander reached an uneasy truce. She threatened to expose him if he so much as thought of contacting Ava, but also recognized the danger of unleashing her fury on Clara in her delicate state. Alexander, desperate to keep his marriage intact and terrified of harming the baby, reluctantly agreed to cease all communication with Ava for the time being. He even blocked her number from his personal phone and swore to Karen he'd put an end to the affair. Ava, however, was not one to be brushed aside so easily. She called Alexander repeatedly, left messages at his office, and even showed up unexpectedly in the company lobby. Veronica, who had once handled Ava's visits with professional courtesy, now refused to let her past the reception desk unless she had an official appointment. Seething with frustration, Ava felt her hold over Alexander slipping, and beneath her cool exterior, jealousy coiled like a serpent. She refused to be dismissed, especially not after he had promised her so much. He wouldn't dare cut me off like this, not after everything. With Ava temporarily out of the picture, Alexander attempted to focus on Clara's well-being. He spent more evenings at home, assisted her with her dietary restrictions, and tried to bring laughter back into the house. For a moment, it looked as though their marriage might survive the storm. Karen watched this renewed effort with guarded relief. Though her resentment for Alexander burned brightly, she recognized that keeping Clara and the baby stable took precedence. Still, the tension gnawed at Alexander. Each day that passed without a word from Ava made him both anxious and oddly resentful. He had grown used to the thrill of her texts, the spark of clandestine meetings. Now, with a vow of silence forced upon him, his mind was a battlefield. Part of him missed her. Another part knew he was toying with disaster. And overshadowing it all was a sinking dread that his betrayal could become public knowledge at any moment, destroying everything he'd worked for: family, fortune, and reputation. One late afternoon, as Clara rested, the landline phone rang. Karen answered. On the other end was a trembling voice belonging to Monica Friedman, a longtime friend of Clara's from her nursing days. Monica was calling to inform them of some unsettling rumors circulating around Rivercrest. She had overheard a group at the local cafe discussing how Alexander Pierce had been spotted on more than one occasion with a mysterious brunette, most recently at an exclusive ski resort in Aspen. Monica, worried sick for her friend, wanted to ensure Clara was shielded from such harmful gossip. Karen felt her pulse hammer. After ending the call, she summoned Alexander into the living room, her voice quivering as she relayed what she'd just heard. Alexander's face went pale, and he sank into the nearest chair. "This is bad," he muttered. "Really bad. If word spreads that I've been unfaithful, especially now." Karen nodded grimly, her eyes filled with concern. They agreed to keep Clara away from social media and local chatter until the storm settled. But it was a fragile plan at best. Yet fate intervened in a way neither of them could have predicted. Clara, feeling restless, decided to check her phone. She'd posted a baby bump photo the week before, and curiosity got the better of her. Scrolling through comments, she stumbled upon a thread of well-meaning acquaintances congratulating her on the pregnancy, but among the supportive messages lurked a cryptic post. "Heard Alexander had a great time in Aspen last month. Too bad you couldn't join him." Confused and alarmed, Clara clicked on the user's profile, but found nothing that clarified the remark. A sharp wave of anxiety seized her. Why would they mention Aspen? Alexander had never mentioned Aspen. The phone nearly slipped from her trembling hand. With a knot forming in her stomach, she realized something about her husband's West Coast investor trip no longer added up. Heart pounding, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and struggled to stand, ignoring the doctor's orders. "I need the truth now." Despite her weakened state, Clara managed to shuffle into the living room, where she found Karen and Alexander engaged in hushed conversation. Their startled faces told her everything she needed to know. "Somebody explain Aspen to me," she demanded, voice trembling. The air thickened with tension as Karen shot Alexander a glare, silently urging him to finally reveal the truth. Alexander swallowed hard, feeling cornered. He led Clara to the couch and knelt beside her, grasping her hands. "I should have told you sooner," he began, his voice thick with remorse. "I went to Aspen with someone else. Her name is Ava. It was never supposed to become what it did." Tears blurred Clara's vision as she listened. She felt her entire body quake, a surge of betrayal and heartbreak threatening to overwhelm her. She looked to Karen, who confirmed Alexander's admission with a solemn nod. "You should rest, honey. This isn't good for your condition," Karen pleaded, placing a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. But Clara was beyond reason. Her sorrow turned swiftly to anger. "You left me here on bed rest, afraid, lonely, trying to protect our baby, and you ran off with another woman," she choked out between sobs. Alexander tried to console her, but she pulled away. The emotional toll was too great. As the gravity of Alexander's infidelity sank in, Clara felt her body go into a tailspin. Dizziness and nausea battered her senses. Karen panicked, urging Alexander to help carry Clara back to bed. Within minutes, her doctor was called. The stress had triggered a dangerous spike in her blood pressure, putting her pregnancy at risk. A hushed sense of terror loomed as Alexander realized his affair might cost him far more than just his marriage. Clara spent the next 48 hours under strict medical observation. Alexander barely left her side, racked with guilt. He held her hand, speaking softly whenever she was awake enough to hear him. "I'm sorry," he repeated like a broken mantra. Karen hovered protectively, ensuring her daughter received everything she needed. She allowed Alexander to remain in the room, but her steely glare reminded him that she held him personally responsible for Clara's deteriorating condition. Meanwhile, Ava, sensing Alexander's silence, escalated her attempts at contact. Veronica deflected her calls, each time more insistently. "He's unavailable," she repeated, though her voice trembled with each lie. Ava grew furious, suspecting that Alexander was being held hostage by domestic drama, and that it was only a matter of time before he turned back to her for solace, or so she believed. A new level of pain had settled over the Pierce household. Alexander watched the love of his life suffer and realized how deeply he'd wounded her, how reckless his thirst for excitement had been. Fear gripped him that Clara would never forgive him, or worse, that their baby might be harmed by the stress. In those tense days, as Clara lay with eyes half closed in quiet agony, Alexander felt an unfamiliar emotion clawing at him, true remorse, the kind that even money or reputation couldn't wash away. Amid the turmoil, Alexander's public relations crisis finally exploded. A rival developer, sensing an opportunity to smear Alexander's carefully cultivated image, leaked rumors to the press. A small online tabloid ran an article alluding to a wealthy local magnate who secretly jetted off to an exclusive winter resort with his mistress, leaving a pregnant wife on bed rest at home. Though the piece didn't name Alexander outright, the veiled references were obvious enough to those familiar with his status and recent travels. Social media caught wind, and speculation mounted. Some readers voiced outrage at the callousness of the alleged affair, while others dug for proof. Soon photos surfaced of Alexander and Ava sipping cocktails at a trendy Aspen lounge, grainy but undeniable. The scandal grew. Business acquaintances began distancing themselves, uncertain how the negative press would impact their own interests. Investors texted Alexander, demanding explanations. Even city council members, who once praised him for philanthropic initiatives, grew wary. Ava watched the fiasco unfold with a mix of pride and anger. Pride, because her role in Alexander's life was now undeniable. She wasn't just some fling hidden in the shadows. Anger, because he appeared to have gone back to his wife, shutting Ava out as though she were disposable. In an impulsive move, she issued a statement through her personal social media account, claiming she had been misled and that she had believed Alexander's marriage was effectively over. The post included a cryptic implication that Alexander had used her for his own gains. This only fueled the fire of speculation. As the scandal roiled, Alexander and Karen tried to shield Clara from the media onslaught. But it was impossible to insulate her fully. Headlines displayed on the television before Karen could switch channels, and notifications lit up Clara's phone with the latest gossip. Though her health slowly stabilized, Clara remained emotionally fragile, her anger tempered by the realization that it was safer for her unborn child if she avoided stress. She spoke little to Alexander, who tried in vain to apologize. Whenever he tried to approach her, she would turn away, tears glistening on her cheeks. Complicating matters further, Alexander's longtime investors began questioning his judgment. If he was so reckless in his personal life, how could they trust him with multi-million-dollar ventures? The local press hounded him for a statement. Camera crews parked outside the Pierce estate, hungry for footage of a teary confrontation or an outraged spouse. Even at the office, employees whispered about his downfall, uncertain whether the brand they worked for would survive this public debacle. Meanwhile, Karen wrestled with her own fury. She saw her daughter battling heartbreak, yet also recognized Clara's ongoing love for her husband. She debated whether they should leave Alexander, at least temporarily, to relieve Clara from the constant tension. But how would Clara fare on her own, especially with a high-risk pregnancy? Torn between motherly protectiveness and practical concerns, Karen watched as the once idyllic life her daughter had built came crashing down like a house of cards. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the estate's tall trees, Alexander received an unexpected visitor. It was Charles Beaumont Ava's older brother. Tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding the easy confidence of someone accustomed to negotiating deals, Charles barged into Alexander's office unannounced. Veronica tried to stop him, but he swept past her with purposeful strides. Shutting the office door behind him, Charles leveled a furious glare at Alexander. "My sister," he said, voice tight with controlled anger, "is the talk of the tabloids, and you've left her to hang in the wind. She's facing public humiliation, all because you can't keep your personal life in check." Alexander, already swimming in guilt, found his temper flaring at the intrusion. "Don't pretend Ava's an innocent victim," he replied. "She knew I was married. She was more than willing to jump in." Charles's fists clenched. "She's my sister. Right or wrong, I'll defend her. But I'm here to give you a chance to make things right by her and by your wife." Alexander frowned, unsure of where the conversation was headed. Charles went on to explain that Ava was contemplating a tell-all interview with a prominent media outlet. She wanted to clear her name, claiming she had been seduced under false pretenses. "Once that hits, you'll be dealing with a scandal far worse than a few leaked photos," Charles warned. The threat collided with Alexander's sense of desperation. If Ava went public, the headlines would multiply overnight. More tabloids would swarm, investors would withdraw, and the minimal trust Clara still had in him might be shattered beyond repair. On top of that, it would put enormous stress on her health. Sensing Alexander's alarm, Charles raised an eyebrow. "I can talk her out of it," he offered, "but it won't be free." It was a veiled demand, and Alexander recognized it instantly. Hush money. If he wanted Ava silent, he'd have to buy her off. Disgust churned in his stomach, but at the same time, a calculating part of him knew it might be the only way to salvage what little remained of his family life. With trembling hands, he told Charles he'd consider the terms. As Charles left, he threw one final remark over his shoulder: "Fix this before everyone gets burned." Shaken, Alexander paced his office, torn between the repulsiveness of being blackmailed and the urgent need to protect Clara from further distress. The affair had already cost him the respect of his loved ones, his employees, and now threatened to devour the financial empire he'd spent a lifetime building. Yet the one thing that scared him most was the possibility of losing Clara and their unborn child. No sum of money could replace them if the stress of scandal pushed her to another crisis. But could hush money truly fix this? As he stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, Alexander realized that even if he managed to keep Ava quiet, he'd still have to face the mess he created: the betrayal, the broken trust, and the emotional scars left on the wife he claimed to love. In the midst of that swirling chaos, Clara's labor pains began unexpectedly early. She was rushed to the hospital, with Alexander gripping her hand in the ambulance, tears streaming down his face. "Hold on, my love," he whispered, his voice choked. Despite her deep hurt, Clara clung to his hand, focusing on breathing through the pain. The tension in the ambulance was palpable. Karen, seated next to the paramedics, eyed Alexander with a complex mix of fear and anger. Over the next tense hours, doctors worked tirelessly to ensure a safe delivery. Clara's complications added an extra layer of concern, but at last, The piercing cry of a newborn echoed through the sterile hospital corridors. A baby boy, small but healthy enough, arrived into a world already burdened by secrets and scandals. Nurses congratulated the new parents, but the moment felt bittersweet. Clara's eyes filled with relief and maternal love, while Alexander held his son in trembling arms, overwhelmed by the miracle and the guilt pressing on his chest. In the hushed hours of the early morning, Alexander found himself alone with his newborn in the hospital's quiet nursery. He stared down at the tiny face, wondering how he had allowed greed and lust to overshadow the promise of this precious life. He recognized that he'd nearly lost everything that truly mattered. Resolving to fight for his family, he stepped out into the hallway to call Ava, ignoring the late hour. When she picked up, her voice was bitter. Before she could launch into accusations, Alexander spoke softly. "We have a child now. Please, just let us be. I'll do whatever it takes. Pay whatever sum Charles is asking. Just don't drag this into the spotlight. I need to focus on my wife and son." Ava hesitated. She had wanted a confrontation, but hearing Alexander's voice cracked with emotion gave her pause. Perhaps she sensed the gravity of the moment, or maybe Charles had already convinced her. There was a larger payoff in quiet acceptance. Whatever her motive, she finally agreed to hold off any interview for now. Days later, Clara was released from the hospital. While she was physically on the mend, their relationship was in dire need of a reckoning. Late one night, as their newborn slept in a cradle nearby, Clara confronted Alexander in the dimly lit nursery. She let him speak his piece about guilt, regret, and his vow to change. He promised to cut ties with Ava permanently, to be fully transparent, even offering to show her every aspect of his daily routine, if that's what it took to win back her trust. Clara, exhausted and conflicted, admitted that she still loved him. "But love alone isn't enough anymore," she said, her voice shaking. "You've broken something, Alexander. If there's any hope, you need to prove you can fix it. I'm not risking my life or our son's happiness on empty words." There, in the soft glow of a nightlight, they reached a fragile understanding. Alexander would seek therapy, possibly couples counseling if Clara was willing. He'd reevaluate his workaholic lifestyle, stepping back from the relentless pursuit of more. And if he ever broke her trust again, she would walk away for good, baby in tow. The next morning, Karen joined them in the nursery. She looked at her grandson, then at her daughter and son-in-law. Though anger still simmered beneath the surface, she recognized this as a tentative new beginning. Clara's needs and the baby's well-being come first, she reminded Alexander. "Don't ever forget that." He nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. Whether the damage was truly fixable would only be revealed in time. But for now, with a tiny new life cradled in Clara's arms, there was a flicker of hope in the silence, a single chance for healing in the face of betrayal. Thank you for journeying through this emotional roller coaster of secrets, scandal, and fragile second chances. The story of Alexander, Clara, and Ava stands as a raw reminder that even the most lavish fortunes can't buy loyalty or undo heartbreak. If this tale resonated with you, if you felt the tension in Aspen's snowy nights, or shared Clara's trembling resolve in that hospital room, then we invite you to stay connected. Show your support by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, and, most importantly, subscribing to our channel. Your engagement fuels our commitment to bringing you more powerful narratives that both captivate and provoke thought. Be sure to share this video with friends who love a good drama, and stay tuned for upcoming stories that shine a light on life's most intricate twists. Remember, every share and subscription helps us keep these stories alive. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.